Hola, Team Bio. Welcome to your next screencast on cell size. Okay, so you may have noticed walking around the world that you never see giant amoebas the size of elephants. And there's a reason for that. Amoebas are single-celled organisms, and elephants are multicellular organisms, just like us. But we don't see massive single-celled organisms. And in fact, the cells we see, even in the most massive organisms, are all this relatively within an order of magnitude, the same size. Cells don't get super big. Which begs the question, what is putting a limit on cell size? Why are cells so small? And there are two major reasons for this. It has to do with the cell membrane, so this ties in. Okay, so our question is, why don't cells get huge? Cells get everything they need in order to survive through their membranes. You should write that down. I guess I should write that down too. So kind of like you need to eat all the food that you need through your mouth in order to survive, a cell needs to bring everything that it needs in order to survive through its membrane. And there are two major ways that things are brought in through the membrane. The first is diffusion. And diffusion is the movement of things directly through the membrane. An example of things that move directly through the membrane are tiny little molecules that are necessary for cell respiration. For example, oxygen, or the waste product of cellular respiration, carbon dioxide. So oxygen needs to be getting into your cells, and CO2 needs to be going out. And they both need to get to this, or out of this tiny little organelle called the mitochondria, everybody's favorite organelle. So oxygen, which is starting outside the cell in high concentration because it's delivered from your blood to your tissue, needs to diffuse in and get to the mitochondria. And CO2 that's produced in the mitochondria in high concentration needs to get out of the cell to the bloodstream, where it's picked up by the blood and transported to the lungs and eventually exhaled. Same thing would happen in a much larger cell, except if you notice a much larger cell, there's a much further distance to diffuse. Boop. So we got oxygen out here in high concentration. And the mitochondria is so far away. So you know that the rate of diffusion is proportional to the temperature. When you increase the temperature, the rate of diffusion speeds up. If you cool it down, it slows it down. When you have a small cell, things are going to diffuse more quickly not in terms of they're not going to move any faster than they are in a big cell, but they're going to get to where they're going faster just because it's a smaller space. So more oxygen is going to be able to reach this mitochondria, and more CO2 is going to be able to diffuse out just because this is a smaller cell relative to this one, where the particles have to diffuse further. Unfortunately, living things can only get so hot before bad things start to happen, like proteins start to denature and maybe things start to break down. So the rate of diffusion is fixed, the temperature can't get too hot, and cells that need essential ingredients like oxygen their organelles can't get too far away from the outside of their cells because they're not going to get the things they need fast enough. Okay, so that's the first reason why cells can't get too big. The second reason has to do with transport. Okay, transport is movement through the membrane that is not diffusion. And we're going to narrow down the different types of transport next week. But there are a couple different types of transport that we'll talk about. What you need to know today is that while diffusion, these molecules are moving directly through the lipid bilayer, transport involves some other mechanism of getting in. Maybe they're getting in through a protein channel, or maybe they're taken in by endocytosis or exocytosis, but it's different than diffusion because it requires some other thing, not just movement directly through the membrane. Okay, so where was I going with this? Okay, yes. So transport is movement of things through the membrane that is not diffusion. Now, check out this funky little triangle shape that I have created here in each of these cells. You'll notice that this green box at the top, imagine I've created like a little window into the cell, and then this area shaded in pink is the entire volume of the cell that is encapsulated by this little window on the outside. So I'm going to introduce a concept that's called surface area to volume ratio. For all you math lovers out here, not ratio. This is a little math, but it's not very hard. Okay, we've got two formulas. Surface area is equal to 4 pi r squared, and volume is equal to 4/3 pi r cubed. So if we set this up as an equation where we say the surface area to volume, ratio is just equal to the surface area 4 pi r squared over the volume, 4/3 pi r cubed. And we can simplify this equation so that we have surface area to volume. The pi's are going to cross out, 2 of the r squareds are going to cross out, and the 4's are going to cross out, 3 is going to come up here. So we have, eventually this is equal to 3 over r. Okay, so why is this important? Well, you'll notice that as we increase the cell size, the volume is increasing at a faster rate than the surface area. So as the cell gets bigger, so as we go from this cell to this cell, the R is bigger in this cell. So as the radius increases, the surface area increases. So obviously this cell has a bigger surface area than this cell. The volume increases. Obviously, this cell has a bigger volume than this cell. But the surface area to volume ratio decreases. So if you look at this number, as R gets, this is the surface area to volume ratio simplified, as R gets bigger and bigger and bigger, this overall number gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And why does that matter? Well, the surface area is the place through which all things are coming into the cell. And so a small cell has a relatively big surface area to provide for all of the ingredients of the cell, which is going to be contained within the volume. As you get to be a bigger and bigger cell, you need more and more things. Like, you're full of stuff here, and you need to supply that stuff with all the things you need to be alive. But the area of volume you need to feed is huge. But the amount of surface area that you have to bring things into the cell is really, really small relative to this amount of volume. I like to think of it like a small town is a small cell. If a small town has only one road to come in and out of the town, it's not a big deal. Maybe it gets a little trafficy at some point, but there aren't that many people traveling on the road. You don't need that many people coming in and out of a small town. However, if you had a huge city with only one road, there would be congestion and traffic all the time. You couldn't get the goods and services that you need to get into and out of the city through this one tiny road, and the city would die. So that's the concept of surface area to volume ratio. As cells get bigger, their surface area increases, their volume increases, but their surface area to volume ratio decreases, and therefore they're not able to transport enough goods and services, so to speak, into their cells, into the inside of them, in order to do the things that they need to stay alive. Okay, that is all.